Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. First up, we begin with the economy. According to preliminary data released by the State Administration of Foreign Exchange over the weekend, direct investment liabilities, a gauge of foreign direct investment in China, collapsed to its lowest quarterly level in more than 2 decades. China's net FDI in Q2 totaled just $4.9 billion, down an incredible 87% year-on-year and 76% quarter-on-quarter, according to the official numbers. This is the lowest level since 1998. We note that this indicator consists of equity and debt investments in both the financial and non-financial sectors and is thus different to the FDI numbers released by the Ministry of Commerce. The Ministry of Commerce figure for gross inflows was 2.7% lower in January through June of this year compared with a year ago, the first decline in 3 years. This is about $41 billion in the second quarter. Again, these are gross inflows, not net inflows. Going back to the net inflow number from over the weekend, even seasoned analysts are shocked by the drop. Quote, "The plunge in the FDI measure is alarming. That could mean there is still new investment coming in, but some firms are reinvesting less of their existing profits as firms talk more about supply chain diversification." End quote. In a Sunday note to clients, analysts at China-based China Minsheng Banking Corp explain that, quote, "Overseas entities affected by headwinds, including supply chain upheavals and geopolitical tensions, have slowed their investment in China." End quote. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that some countries' efforts to de-risk ties with China by reducing reliance on its supply chains, coupled with an escalating Sino-US trade war on technology, quote, "have taken some of the shine off China's appeal as a foreign investment destination. Many overseas firms are dialing back local operations or expansion plans, while some are relocating manufacturing and sourcing outside of the country." End quote. Of course, we have been following this process for some time. US-based Bloomberg writes that the economy's waning recovery this year has further dampened confidence among overseas firms, which have seen profits fall at double-digit rates amid subdued consumer demand in the country. Another reason, which we have seen in chambers of commerce reports and surveys, is that the tightening grip on security, especially with the passage of the new counter-espionage law and other actions, have spooked some global executives and cooled investor sentiment. We note that some industries have seen growth in overseas investment, most obviously car manufacturing from Japanese and European automakers, but for most other industries, foreign investment has collapsed. Back in July, US-based Rhodium Group also warned that the slump could be even worse than these numbers indicate, because the data increasingly measure purely financial transactions. Quote, "As a result, China's decision-makers may not know when they need to adjust policies more aggressively to attempt to restore business confidence. Amidst a broader structural slowdown in China's economy, the delayed reactions could contribute to further losses in productivity and economic growth." End quote. And while we're on the economy, let's touch on some modestly positive news before we move on to the next development. This week, the Caixin BBD New Economy Index showed that the contribution of high value-added industries, such as new energy and biotechnology, to China's total economic outputs picked up modestly in July. Quote, "due to growing labor and technology inputs." End quote. The index came in at 29.5, up from 28.2 in June, indicating that monitored new economy industries as a percentage of overall output increased month on month. Of the 10 tracked industries, the new information technology sector remained the largest contributor in July, followed by energy conservation and environmental protection industries. The New Economy Index reports are jointly compiled by Caixin Data Technology Co., Chinese big data research firm BBD, and the National School of Development at China's prestigious Peking University, and defines a new economy industry as one that is technology and human capital intensive but asset light, experiences sustainable and rapid growth, and is deemed strategically important by the government. Next up, EU, China, and trade. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. If you're getting some value from these sorts of episodes and you'd like to stay on top of the most up-to-date analysis on China and its economy, and you have not subscribed, like 50% of viewers, maybe consider subscribing. Sharing this with someone who would also enjoy this sort of content is also a massive help. And for anyone who can go the extra mile and help keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, in an interview with UK-based The Financial Times, EU's Trade Commissioner expressed that Brussels will press Beijing to reduce barriers to European exports at a high-level meeting in September after the EU's trade deficit with China hit almost 400 billion euros last year, double the deficit from 2 years ago, and an amount the senior EU official described as staggering. Quote, "The China-EU trading relationship is very unbalanced. China is running a huge trade surplus, and the level of openness from the Chinese side is not the same as the level of openness from the EU side." End quote. We have heard similar comments coming from the US in recent years too. However, the EU has not been as aggressive with trade restrictions and other actions in response to these concerns than their counterparts across the Atlantic. Dombrovskis stressed that the EU only seeks to de-risk, not decouple from the Chinese economy, and then criticized Beijing's recent export restrictions on gallium and germanium, expressing that his team is now doing a detailed analysis of the provisions and their potential impact on supply chains and EU industries, and, quote, "Indeed, there are concerns as these export restrictions go beyond what is needed to protect the essential security interests," end quote. He concluded the interview with the outlet by expressing that, quote, "China has benefited enormously from its WTO, World Trade Organization, membership, but many of China's practices are actually distorting that level playing field. It's important that China is cooperating on WTO reform because it's one of the biggest beneficiaries of WTO, and it should also be in China's interests that the system continues to function." End quote. Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis, who we often quote on China Update, criticized the EU trade chief, expressing today that his WTO way of thinking is not very helpful. The trade deficit the EU runs with China, Pettis argues, isn't about the relative openness of the two economies. Quote, "What matters is the extent of direct and indirect subsidies to the manufacturing sector in each economy, and because these subsidies are affected through transfers from the household sector, the impact of these subsidies on repressing domestic demand. That is why countries run surpluses. Without the effect of these subsidies on domestic demand, rising exports would be matched by rising imports. The whole point of boosting exports should be to maximize imports and social welfare, not to run surpluses." End quote. Improving trade openness between China and the EU won't change much, Pettis argues. China will still run surpluses and the EU deficits because of the huge supply-side support Chinese manufacturers receive, instead of the demand-side support their economy really needs, he says, adding, quote, "Our current WTO compliance system allows an enormous amount of mercantilist, trade-distorting policies, as long as these are considered industrial policies and not banned as trade policies." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.